Let's talk about the second ENTJ subtype, the creative ENTJ. What does this subtype look like? What careers do they choose? And maybe what are the challenges they face?
So this ENTJ might actually be mistyping as a perceiver. I wouldn't be surprised if these ENTJs think that they're either ENTPs or maybe even ENFPs. It's a very different style of ENTJ than the dominant. Some of the characteristics is that they're notably curious, they're idealistic, they're fun-loving, they exude a magnetic energy that attracts other people, and they just have an it quality a lot of times. They are, because they're so creative and curious, they have outside-the-box thinking. They also might, unlike the stereotype of an ENTJ, might not have great prefrontal cortex executive wiring. And what that means is that they might not be good at focusing on the task at hand and making quick decisions about, executive calls. In fact, they might even beat themselves up for being easily distractible or maybe indecisive or lazy, even though they look goal-driven to everybody else. They might be beating themselves up for being too lazy.
Yeah.
And so this is a more chill vibe version of an ENTJ in a career sense. They're not nearly as ambitious, although there's still an ambitious aspect to them. Some of the ways of noticing them or spotting them is that Daria calls them adventurers who travel and act with purpose. Right? So there's a lot of exploring diverse topics, a lot of actual exploring the world, being a true adventurer, being open to new places and new activities and new things. Although they almost always bring a technical and a business mindset to almost everything they do. So even though there is going to be this sense of sort of openness and curiosity, they're still going to figure out ways to get ROI for, does that make sense? It's like they're going to figure out a way to build a business model around it.
Oh, yeah.
Or leverage it so that there is a business component to it, even though to everybody else, they might look a little bit more carefree and laissez-faire. There is a way to understand where, opportunities when they arise and making the right connections and doing all the things that they need to do in order to not be a starving artist, so to speak. They like to play with a lot of data and ideas at once. They easily hold an international outlook, right? How things are going to unfold on a global scale. They have a restless drive for remarkable experiences. So they tend to be very fun and doing a lot of fun things that attract other people's attention. And they also are fairly independent. But because of that weaker executive piece, they usually need somebody to handle some of those details for them. So they do best if they have an assistant, almost like a handler that's helping them get some of the nitty-gritty handled.
Could we also say, weaker... I can almost imagine someone with ENTJ preferences doesn't want to feel like their subtype is weak at something. Could we say more diffused than weak as far as executive skills, or is it actually their executive skills are weak?
Well, in comparison to, say, the dominant ENTJ. So whenever we talk about these subtypes, we're still talking about that type. So an ENTJ is going to have better executive skills than, say, other types, regardless of whether or not they fall in the category of the creative, which is a little less than other versions of ENTJs. But they're still going to have better executive skills than other types that don't care, right? And so, I think it's, just remember we're talking about it like apples to apples, not apples to oranges.
Agreed. And I think the reason I'm bringing it up too is because we want to talk about capacity, not we're talking about framing it as weak means it's a capacity issue rather than a attunement issue.
Right. It's kind of a preference issue. It's like if you really enjoy being creative outside the box, exploring, having all these great experiences and not really wanting to be tied down, well, you're not as insistent on tying everything down and making sure everything is set up exactly the way it should be.
But it doesn't mean you don't have access to that part of yourself. If you wanted to, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, lean into one of these other energies. Let's say you're a creative subtype and you want to become more of a dominant subtype, get better at the executive skills. Mm-hmm. The capacity is available to you as an ENTJ. It just means that maybe you're not attuned to it right now. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about that in a moment.
Yeah.
So that's the point I want to make is it's not like you're doomed here. It's like, oh, well, I don't have executive skill. I guess I can't develop that part of me as an ENTJ. No, that's very available to you.
Yeah. And we tried to make this point pretty clear in all these episodes in this series that what's nice about understanding these subtypes is it reminds you that a lot of things are skills that are developed over time, not just intrinsic talents. Like you don't just get bit by a spider and all of a sudden you have superhero powers. It's like in real life you have to work for it.
Yeah.
And so it's I think this concept of weaker executive skills. I mean, I'm not sure if we're like trying to make sure that we're not insulting an ENTJ out there, but somebody who's a creative ENTJ probably knows this about themselves.
Sure.
They're identifying with that, going like, you're right. My bargain is that I have more freedom and less capacity to say take over a company, and I don't really care to do that anyway. So I'm okay with having not the same executive skills as my, say, dominant ENTJ brethren.
But it also works the other way. If I'm a dominant ENTJ and I want to be more creative, I might have to let go of some of that rigor and getting things done in the same way I used to.
Yep, you got
diffuse that a little bit, let that go a little bit better.
Yep.
Or a little bit more. And then that allows me to dip more into that creative side of myself if I'm an ENTJ listening.
Yep.
So anything else you want to cover before we go one layer deeper into the type geek stuff?
Oh, let's talk about the specific careers.
Let's do it.
Okay. So they're usually looking for something that blends business, creativity, a social component, and technical skills. And so because they also tend to have star power, like an it factor, and they are usually pretty naturally charismatic, it's not uncommon for them to put themselves in the public eye. So this style of creative ENTJ is going to, like entrepreneurship is more on the table for them than maybe even the dominant ENTJs can be entrepreneurs too, for sure. But this style is more likely to be attracted to entrepreneurship and be almost like a figurehead there, right? Like the spokesperson for the company that they start. They can also be seen as like social media influencers. That's not uncommon. But you're also going to see them in the arts. You'll see them maybe as television executives or screenwriters even. You'll see them as directors, producers, even actors. ENTJ actors are usually the creative subtype. I know at least two off the top of my head, ENTJ science fiction writers who are most likely creative subtypes.
Yeah.
And things like, they still have good executive capacity, even if it's weaker than their dominant brethren. So you might see them doing things like running special interest conventions. I wouldn't be surprised if the people at the top of, say, Comic-Con are creative ENTJ types. I don't know that to be true. I've never met them, but it's like that's the kind of thing that probably would really appeal.
The comic book guy in The Simpsons. Is he an ENTJ
I am not going to profile
the
the comic book guy in The Simpsons.
You can't profile him because he's not a real person. So you'd only be able to like type him. But yeah, that's how
he's not running anything. I mean, I guess his comic book shop.
Running the comic book shop.
Yeah, it's true.
Let's go a layer deeper. For type geeks, I'm making a disclaimer now.
Well, and I did say that they might mistype as perceivers, right?
Yes.
As ENTPs or ENFPs. Okay.
Yeah. Let's go one layer deeper. The neurotransmitter of choice is dopamine for creative subtypes. All creative subtypes, not just the creative ENTJ. And the two attunements of the functions. If the dominant has both functions, extroverted thinking effectiveness and introverted intuition perspectives, analytically focused. What about this creative subtype?
So creative subtypes, their perceiving function is the one that is analytic, and the judging function is the one that has holistic preferences. So in this case for ENTJs, it would be introverted intuition or perspectives would be the analytic function. And then the judging function of extroverted thinking or effectiveness, that would be holistic. And that makes sense, right? Having the executive part be a little bit more open framed, a little less insistent on things being a certain way.
Yeah.
That makes sense that they would have less certainty in how to make everything happen and attending to, all the details. Whereas their perceiving function, the intuitive, the creative part of them would be a lot more analytic. It would be maybe even more visionary, more focused on making things in their mind, like something that they've run simulations around or world building or something that's creative inside of themselves, wanting to see that play out in real life, wanting to bring that creativity to the world.